Welcome to Novelist Spotlight. This is Mike Consol, your host. Two quick things before introducing you to my guest. First, I encourage you to subscribe to this podcast by clicking on the follow button and also clicking on the bell icon so you are alerted to each new edition of the program. Second, in addition to being the producer of this podcast and interviewing novelists, I am a novelist myself. I've written 4 books, 3 novels, and 1 short story collection. In the episode notes, you will find a short link to my Amazon page and all 4 of those titles. Now, on with our program. In the spotlight is Tracy Clark. She was born in Chicago. She calls it the greatest city ever. She says it must be so because I'm still here, loving the seasons, cursing the heat, shivering through the frigid winters, complaining endlessly about the humidity, but none of it seriously enough to prompt me to pack up and move someplace else. When she was growing up, she read everything that she could get her hands on, but the progression towards a life of fiction went something like this. Dr. Seuss to Amelia Bedelia, and from Amelia to Harriet the Spy, a book I read as a young boy, and from Harriet to Agatha Christie, and so on. Along the way, she managed to graduate college and grad school and then start a career in the newspaper business. She now edits by day. She writes around her work schedule. She's up at 5:30 a.m. with her laptop and a cup of Earl Grey tea. Never mind the coffee, Earl Grey tea, the Queen's tea, at her side. And she says, hopefully putting down something that I can use before I have to then swivel over to editing op-eds, comic strips, crossword puzzles and features and so on. Obviously, an awful lot of that stuff is usable because she's got a host of novels. So in addition to being a native Chicagoan, she's also the author of award-winning Cass Raines Chicago mystery novels featuring ex-cop and private investigator Cassandra Raines, and the Detective Harriet Foster series featuring Harriet Foster, a homicide detective with the Chicago Police Department. 2 tough, smart African-American female characters work in the mean streets of the Windy City. She's a multi-nominated Anthony, Lefty, McCavity, Edgar, and Seamus Award finalist. Those are a lot of accolades right there alone. Tracy Clark is also the 2020 and 2022 winner of the G.P. Putnam's Sue Grafton Memorial Award, as well as the 2022 Sarah Paretsky Award. And she is a proud member of the Crime Writers of Color organization, as well as Mystery Writers of America and Sisters in Crime. Her debut novel, Broken Places, made Library Journal's list of the best crime fiction of 2018. Wow. When not writing, she's watching old black and white movies, reading, or just puttering around. And as a proud Chicagoan, it's deep dish and hot dogs. No ketchup. Of course, no ketchup. Mustard is so superior on a hot dog to ketchup. Tracy Clark, after that extensive intro, it wouldn't be that extensive except that you're accomplished. Welcome to Novelist Spotlight.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm heat wave over here, but I'm making it. In the house, under the air, trying to stay alive.
And you're still not even thinking about packing your bags and moving to a colder climate.
Kind of like it. I mean, it sort of evens out. I love the winter, not so much the summer, but the winter makes up for it.
Yeah, if you're a writer, the winter means it's cozy. You're indoors. You're watching black and white movies, and then you're being inspired to sit down and do some writing.
Yeah.
It's kind of a writer's kind of element, I would say. You don't want the temptation of going out to the lakeside and
Ugh.
all that because
No,
you don't get work done out there.
nah, not much, not too much.
You came to my attention because you wrote an article, and this is where I'd like to start with you. You wrote an article for Writer's Digest called 5 Tips for Creating Character Voice Readers Will Love.
Mhm.
Obviously, you are a character-based novelist. You write about a couple different detectives whose work you have rendered. And what I'd like to do is have you talk a little bit about these 5 tips. First thing I'm going to do, though, is actually make my way to the, oh yeah, here it is. I thought I had called up the article myself, and here it is. I what I want to do, Tracy, is let me name off the 5 tips, and
Okay.
then we'll go have you drill down into each one, give us a little bit of an explanation on each of them.
All right.
So, tip number 1 is character. Tip number 2 is distinctiveness. Tip 3, sound/style. Tip 4, dialogue. Tip 5, backstory. So, um, I definitely wanted to run through these with you because you've obviously, as I say, you write character-based novels, detective novels, and you're obviously creating characters and creating a voice that has been abiding with readers. Let's start with character. Number 1, you say character. What about character?
Well, character, I think, is the most important thing about fiction. I mean, we want readers to be engaged in our stories. We want them to sort of read page by page. And I think we accomplish that, writers do, by giving them characters that resonate with them, characters that sort of represent as human. They sort of recognize them as human beings. They know what they're feeling. They know what they're thinking. They've been in those situations because we're all human beings. And so you want to give them a sort of a commonality, something that they can sort of latch on to. Whether those characters are good or bad or sort of ambiguous, it doesn't matter. They have to have a character on whose shoulders they sort of sit and sort of go through your story. And if you don't give them a character that is engaging, a character that they are interested in, a character that they want to sort of come back and figure out whether or not they're going to get what they need, then you lose them. So you have to give them something to sort of latch on to. So character for me is first and foremost. I sort of write character-driven stories as opposed to plot-driven stories. I sort of learned early on as I was sort of teaching myself how to write. Teachers would say, well, you either have a character-driven story or a plot-driven story. And I knew right away that character-driven was going to be my niche. And I did that because that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in how people live, how people think, how people feel, how they go through struggles, how they get through the hurdles that writers give them. And we give them hurdles because that's what fiction is about. It's about conflict and tension and churn and all those wonderful things that sort of get you interested. And characters have to be able to sort of hold up to that. So I
Yeah,
knew right
yeah.
away that character driven was going to be it. And then it became a process of trying to figure out how to create book people that were as or seemed as real people were. So character first and foremost, and then everything else sort of blossoms around that.
You are not the only one who believes that, of course. One of the big names in fiction writing who said character first and foremost is Larry McMurtry. He said story is nice, setting is nice, and this and that's nice. But he said if you don't have a character that people connect with, all is lost. And people care, people connect with people. And you render a good character and you've got somebody locked in. Especially a character they care about or they despise, I would imagine. You want the bad guy, you always want to see that the bad guy get his or her comeuppance.
Yeah.
You mentioned number 2 is distinctiveness. I mean, we can't all create Dashiell Hammett because
Hmm.
that'll just be a skipping record. So
Right.
how do we achieve distinctiveness?
Well, you listen. I think what writers do the best is listen to how people talk. See people out in the street. I mean, writers are the people who are sitting in that coffee shop in the table by themselves, listening to the conversation in the table next to them. Okay, we're looking for characters. We're looking for how people sort of interact with each other. One person is not going to speak the same way the other person speaks. They're going to be two distinct personalities, and it's that distinctiveness that we're going for. So we want things that sort of ping on, something a little odd, something a little off, something that not everybody sort of exhibits. We're looking for that little kernel of, I guess, creativity or strangeness. That's sort of what's going to add something to the character. So your characters cannot all be the same. There's got to be something between one character and the other that is different, that makes them different, that makes them sound different, look different, walk different, talk different. And so, yeah, we're looking for those things, whatever they are. Some of those things we create on our own. They just sort of pop into our heads. Some things we find out in the street, some on the line at the grocery store. Somebody sort of walks differently or holds their head differently or talks in a different way that we haven't sort of heard a lot about. So yeah, we're looking for those things, those little sparks.
Gotcha. And then there's sound and style. When you say sound and style, what exactly do you mean?
Well, we don't talk the same, do we? Even in Chicago, we've got, I don't know, five or six different accents. We've got that South Chicago accent. We've got the Southeast side accent. We're all different. And you can sort of ping people from how they speak, what words they use, how they sound, whether or not it's nasal here in Chicago, or if it's not. So we kind of, those things too, go back to building that character layer by layer, distinctiveness by distinctiveness. How do they sound? How do they speak? Do they speak in complete sentences like they've been to Harvard or whatever, or do they not? So those things can sort of add another distinctiveness level. What I write about cops most of the time. Cops don't speak like college professors. Okay, they have their own language. They have their own shortcuts. They all have their own accents. North Side cop is not going to talk like a South Side cop. And so those things are you have to sort of write and listen to and put onto your pages. And the more you can do that, the more distinctive and specific you can make it, the better you're going to be because those characters are going to sort of lift themselves off the pages and not sort of be stereotypical in any way, which is what you want.
Yeah, and I would imagine it is a pretty common thing. I'm sure literary agents and editors run into authors who are writing in their own voice, and then all the characters have that same
Yeah,
voice. They're not differentiating them. So it's kind of like, wait a minute, who's speaking here? And why does
exactly.
everybody sound the same? The
Exactly.
cop sounds like the criminal, sounds
Right.
like the guy in the crime lab, and so on.
Yeah. I don't see a lot of criminals out there speaking like Henry Higgins. I mean, it just doesn't happen.
How about dialogue? That's number four, dialogue.
Dialogue, well, I think the biggest mistake new writers make, which is what I made when I sort of started out, is that fiction dialogue is different than how people actually speak because it's got a specific purpose. When you're writing dialogue on the page, you're writing dialogue that sort of moves your story along. So it can't be just sort of meandering, talking like you're sitting in a grocery store or something. It has to be specific. It has to be sort of purposeful. Dialogue has to be sort of shorthanded. You're trying to get your story told in this bit of dialogue to move that action to the next action to the next action, like dominoes falling on each other. And so dialogue has to be very succinct. It has to be very specific, very precise. Even if it sort of appears that you're sort of meandering and sort of talking about the weather, you're not really. It's got to be about something else. So once you sort of build these characters, you've given them this distinctiveness, you've made them sound different, they talk different, blah, blah, blah. And now they have to sort of think differently and sort of express themselves in a different way. So that you can sort of pick up a character off the page just by dialogue and know exactly who you're talking about because they don't talk the same. And so again, specific, different, but human.
Yeah, it's really questionable the advice that some writers give. They say write dialogue like people talk. Well, if you
Uh,
ever eavesdrop on people, it's very boring.
it
It's
is.
boring, and it's not, as you say, it's not purposeful. It's not really moving a story along. I I've kind of toyed with that where I've just listened to people talking, and it's like this would never fly in a book. The person would put the novel down because it's kind of like, where is this going? They're meandering all over the place, and
Right.
they're not really saying a heck of a lot. And then there's also the question of how much does the author, just tell through expository writing versus the characters kind of telling the story. You know who just died very recently is Frederick Forsyth. And I haven't read a lot of his novels, but I will say his novels are almost entirely expository writing. There's almost no quoted matter at all. He just tells the story.
Yeah.
And who can argue it? In his case, it works because, I mean, Day of the Jackal was a huge hit, and he
Mhm.
was very famous with several of his other novels as well. So that's always a consideration. Just what the ratio between expository versus dialogue. Finally, number five is backstory. Talk about backstory.
Well, that goes back to, I guess, the character layering, right? You want to give your characters, once you've sort of decided who they're going to be, you want to give them something interesting to sort of deal with. When we meet them on the page, we want them to have like a full life behind them. A life full of challenges and struggles and life stuff that we all have to sort of deal with. That's part of making them appear human or feel human to the reader. And so the more complicated you can sort of make that backstory, the better you are. I mean, you want a deep character. You want a character who's had to deal with some stuff. And so you want something to be fully rounded and complicated and multi-layered and sticky and messy and all the things that humanity is. So I sort of invest a lot of time in sort of figuring not only who the characters are, but where they came from. Before we meet them on that first page, what has gone before? And so you sort of sprinkle those little elements as you create them about the story. I mean, you don't learn everything about the character right up in one bat, not in one fell swoop, but you sort of sprinkle those little details, whatever you've decided they're going to be, throughout the story, because that becomes your character's arc. They start at point A, and you've got to get them to point Z or wherever you want to end it. But they've got to go through some stuff, and they've got to deal with whatever that stuff is as they're sort of dealing with whatever present problem that you've given them. So they've got to come to the page fully human, or as human as you can make them. And so they've got to have stuff to deal with. So just like we all do. So that's what backstory does for you. It gives you that sort of gravitas, that sort of weight that that character needs to sort of get through whatever struggle you give them.
Now, so again, to our listeners, that's from the readers, not readers, a Writer's Digest story, written by Tracy Clark. Those are the five elements there. You can always look that one up if you wanted to read it word for word, but not until we're done talking here, because I've got plenty of other questions for Tracy, including how you go about creating characters, Tracy. Now, you've got two, of course, very well developed characters with Cass Raines and Harriet Foster, but you introduce characters in these novels, new characters. What is your process? I mean, I've heard authors that say you just write about that person. You write and you write and you write for days or even weeks until you really understand that character. You understand them as a person. Does it need to be that extensive? Because these are not your main characters. Your main characters are already fully established. But how would you go about writing kind of the secondary or tertiary characters?
I put them in a room. That's what I do with primary characters and also secondary characters. You don't know who they are until they do something. So I put them in a room and they have to do something. And I think as they do that, you figure out who they are. How do they think about things? How do they process challenges or problems? Are they sort of the courageous kind, or are the kind that sort of slink into a corner or whatever when they're confronted by something? You make them do stuff. And that's how you learn who they are. So I'm a pantser, which means I don't have any kind of outline or a plan going into these books as I write them. For the series, I have my panel of characters, my stock team, and so I kind of know who they are from book to book. Secondary characters come into as I need them. So I might write a scene where my homicide cops are there and they need somebody to sort of ping off of, and there the character comes. And then of course, then I have to figure out who they are and how they think and how they move and how they talk and all the rest of that stuff. But you have to sort of figure out who they are by putting them in situations where they have to do something. They have to take some kind of action. They have to go here or there, front or back. And through those processes, through those actions, we kind of figure out, what kind of person they are, and we go from there. So we put them in there. It's like having dolls in a sort of a dollhouse. You put them in the room, you sort of create an action, and then figure out what happens next. So that's kind of how I do it. I'm pretty sure there are more evolved writers out there who have a plan and know exactly what's going to happen and what the motivations of their characters are. I don't know that until I make them do stuff.
So interesting. I was going to ask you about that, whether you do an outline or you write organically. So, given that you're a pantser, have you had situations where, because you don't have an outline, because you don't necessarily know where it's going to end up, where you've written yourself into a corner and decided, well, I'm going to have to throw this out, or I'm going to have to just rethink this thing all over again?
I live in the corner. I don't have no plan. I write myself into corners a million times during a book. I just do. I've tried outlining. My brain just does not work that way. So I have to hit the thing on the page and I sort of write and I write and write. Sometimes it's great. The scenes sort of fall on each other and they go well. Sometimes I sort of get stuck and so I've taken a wrong turn and I have to go back. But it's all sort of two steps forward, one step back, following the characters as they go through the story, setting challenges for them, putting them in situations where they're going to have to do something miraculous to sort of get out of it. But I have to sort of get to that point, as I get to that point. I don't know it's coming ahead of the time. I write till, it makes sense. Sometimes it doesn't. I have to go back and sort of reevaluate and adjust. Sometimes it's smooth sailing for maybe two or three chapters, and then I figure out a better way to sort of cook this goose and sort of have to go back now and sort of make those adjustments so that I can put that new stuff in. So it's a million times doing that, doing a book, back and forth, corners and out of corners. But that's kind of the way my brain has to do it. I've tried to sort of train myself to do something else and it just will not work. And so I guess I'm a pantser to the end and I just have to deal with the stress and all the questions and stuff like that as long as I write. So unfortunately, that's me. Right, Panthers are not the most normal people, but it all works in the end. We get to the same place, just have a different process getting there.
Well, I think there's a lot of novelists who want to be pantsers. They want to write organically, but it doesn't work for them. They need the blueprint. And I think that the majority of out there, they actually dope it all out ahead of time.
Yeah.
And they want to know where they're going. They
That's
need the
got to be the smart
structure.
way. That's the smart way to do it. I mean, it really is. When I looking at it from the outside, looking in, it's the smartest way to do it. I just can't. My brain doesn't work that way.
Well, but also because you don't work with an outline, you allow for serendipity. I mean, you allow things to happen. And it sounds like what you're saying is, yeah, I write myself into a corner, but then along the way, I continue to solve problems as they arise or get out of the traps that I get myself in. And, just do your sharp thinking and it gets done. Now, you mentioned I write and I write and I write, which, you're up at 5:30 in the morning
Yep.
with your laptop
Yep.
and talk about your writing routine. Up at 5:30, the Earl Grey tea is steeping, and you put in how much time each day?
Well, let's see. Still got my day job. I edit by day and I write, all around that. So 5:30 to 8, that gives me about 2.5 hours every day of solid writing. That's me sitting down at the desk with the laptop, pecking on the keyboard, trying to get this story down. And then I'm thinking about it after that 8 o'clock cutoff, all through the day, all through the night. I wake up in the morning thinking about it. I'm thinking about it while I'm eating my lunch because the story doesn't go anywhere. It's just in my head, waiting to get to the next 5:30.
Yes, incubating.
Yeah, so that's 2.5 hours is just active writing. I'm thinking about it all the other times along with my day job and whatever else I've got to do, life-wise. But it's always there until I finish. I'm thinking about better ways to do it. Was that last scene that I wrote the day before really dynamic enough, or were the stakes raised high enough to sort of get me to the next point? If not, when I meet at 5:30 the next day, I've got to go back and sort of figure out what better thing I can do about it before I move on. I mean, they tell you sort of to just keep going all the way through until you finish and then go back and revise. Again, my brain does not work that way. And so I have to fix the problem as I meet the problem. And so once I've solved whatever that thing is, then I can move on to the next thing and we're, off to the races. But I have to fix it and then move on. And so I'm always thinking about it. I only have that 2.5 active writing, but I'm also writing in my head all the rest of the time. So that's kind of how I have to do it. That's
Yeah.
all the time I've got.
Yeah. What happens when, I mean, I'm sure there's times during the day when something, you have, these small flashes, epiphanies, or what have you. And then what do? You just scribble down
I've got
some
got
verbiage to remember to go to work on it later.
Yep. I've got a stack of post-it notes right here on my desk. If I have something in the middle of the day that sort of solves whatever problem I left behind, I scribble it down and put it on my on my writing laptop. And that's what I sort of hit 5:30 the next morning. So I'm always thinking about it. I think all writers are. Their stories are always there until they finish them. And so I'm thinking about it all the time. I active writing 2.5, and then all the rest of the time, that's it. And so if a spark of something comes, I figure out a better way to build that mouse trap, then I will write it on a post-it note, stick it on my laptop, and then we'll hit it the next day. So,
Do you keep your post-it notes do you try to keep them in order
nah,
in
they're all over
progression? They're all over. Okay, then
they're all
you
over
just figure that out later,
they're all over.
exactly where you're going to plug them in.
Yeah, when
Uh,
I put them in, I sort of crunch up the post-it note, throw it away, and then I move on to the next thing. So I'm not really fancy about it and not really precious about the notes that I write. Once I've solved the problem and instituted whatever that note is, it goes in the garbage and then I move on.
Now you write and edit for a publication. Which do you mind telling us which publication it is?
Well, I'm a newspaper editor for the Tribune Company, so I do their syndicate stuff. So I'm looking at op-eds and crossword puzzles and jumble and all the rest of those
For
wonderful
the
things.
Chicago Tribune?
Oh yeah, so that's what I do.
All right. The
We all
esteemed
came.
Chicago Tribune.
The
Yeah.
cool thing about it is we all sort of came home after the pandemic, and we never came back. So I'm working from home, two laptops, one desk, and so it's kind of cool.
Yeah, exact same thing happened with the magazine company I work for. It's COVID. We went home and nobody wanted to go back. I mean, I like the office. I'd actually like to spend a little bit more time in the office, but we are a virtual company now, like so many others.
Yeah.
Actually, the kind of work we do is it lends itself very well to working from home. So it works for this profession.
Mm.
Does your private investigator, Cass Raines, and your detective, Harriet Foster, ever meet on your pages? Have they ever crossed paths in your novels or not? Or do you keep them separate? Because I know they're two separate series.
They meet in the latest book that comes out in December. It's the first time that they meet. And you would
Oh,
think that there would be some kind of simpatico, sort of understanding or some kind of mutual admiration. It's oil and water, which is kind of what you want with fiction. Nothing should ever be easy for your characters. And even in this encounter, there's some tension and some conflict. And I kind of like that. I kind of like putting them in a position where you would think they would have a lot in common, right? I mean, two African American women, fighting crime in Chicago, one an ex-homicide detective, one a current homicide detective, and yet, there's some little some fun action that goes on. So I kind of like that. I like keeping things interesting. I kind of like making them not easy all the time. And so they meet in I think Edge is the next book that comes out in December, and they meet there. So we figure out who they are and how they sort of interact together, and it's fun. I think I sort of created a relationship that probably could go somewhere if I chose to do it, but it could end there if I left it there. So it's kind of cool. I had fun writing it.
so the title is Edge, comes
Edge.
out in December.
Mhm.
Gotcha. So now is Cassandra Raines a former cop turned investigator?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay, so um, cops and private investigators don't necessarily get along anyway, right? Because the
No,
cops are doing things officially, and it's like, what's this woman coming along doing, messing around
exactly.
with this? They're asking questions, they're following up, and maybe on some of the people I spoke to, and confusing the issue for some of my potential witnesses or some of my potential bad actors or what have you.
Huh?
So it makes sense. It does make
Yeah,
sense.
yeah.
Um, now. Talk about the turning point, if there was one in your writing life. Was there a time when you had an epiphany of some kind, or you got some advice of some kind, or you went to a writing workshop of some kind where it's like, wow, that turned a corner for me and my writing really accelerated after that?
Um, I don't know. I don't think there's one specific piece of advice. I remember sitting at one writers' conference early on when I was still in college, and I sort of went to them, not having written anything good and sort of looking for advice and, some kind of direction. And one of the instructors said, well, somebody stood up and said, well, how do you get published? Or how do you make sure that you get published? And the guy said, well, all you have to do to get published is write a good book. So up until that point, I was sort of stressing about, craft elements and pacing and oh, how am I going to do this? I don't know how to do this, and all you have to do is write a good story. And it took me more than 20 years, I think, to sort of get myself to a point where I could sort of write a solid story. Now, it was not good or bad or whatever. It was a solid story in terms of craft elements, in terms of character development, and sort of getting through the middle and the beginning and end and all of those wonderful things that you sort of have to go through. A solid, well-rounded story that said something, said what I wanted it to say, and that I felt comfortable sort of sending out into the world and trying to get published. So write a good story. The best advice I've ever gotten. Keep writing was the second favorite advice that I was ever given. Just keep doing it. The more you do it, the better you get. The better you get, the better your chances become. So you just have to keep at it. I mean, the only people who lose are the ones who sort of give up and stop and do something else. If this is what you want, you have to write. And you have to write until you get it right. And as long as that takes, it took me 20 years, over 20 years to get a book deal. And that was back and forth. That was sending stuff off and getting rejected and sending query letters off again and getting rejected again. And you know, you have to sort of decide who you are. Are you a writer? If you're a writer, you have to write. You have to keep writing.
So talk about when you found your agent. So you obviously you said 20 years you were sending manuscripts off to literary agents trying to get somebody to say, okay, I want to represent you. How did that happen? Did you get an email reply saying, hey, I'd like to, I mean, they usually want a sample, then it's hey, I like what I read, send me the full manuscript. Can you give us a little insight into how it came down for you? It must have been very exciting at the time.
Well, yeah, I think it's exciting for everybody when they sort of get that nod, right?
Yeah.
Um, I sort of joined a writer's workshop here in Chicago. One of the rejection letters that I got, usually they're sort of standard, we're not interested, blah, 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 good luck in your future endeavors. One particular one said, that suggested that I sort of join a writer's workshop. And so that's what I did. I sort of Googled writers' workshops in Chicago, and I found the Writers Loft here in Chicago. And I stayed there for 2 years, retooling manuscripts that I had in the drawer, until I sort of got them in a spot where they were pretty good. The instructor, Mary Carter, who is now a great friend of mine, suggested that maybe she should sort of throw it to her agent, which she did, which she didn't have to do, which was a great thing. And I, thank her every day for that. And he took me. So I sort of got referred in, but that was after 20 years of sort of, getting rejected.
Mhm.
And I got that email while I was actually working at my day job, sort of popping up on my little email thing there. And he said, I would, really like to represent you. Would you be interested? Now, after 20 years of sending stuff off and getting rejected and having those rejection letters piled up, getting an email with somebody who asked you, not only, say, I'll represent you, but asked you if they could represent you, it's kind of a shock. And I had sort of got up from my desk and sort of strolled to the bathroom and sort of got some water and it came back before I answered it. Of course, the answer was going to be yes, but after so long of nobody wanting anything, to have somebody sort of email you right off the bat on a Tuesday to say, I would like to represent you was kind of a cool thing. And
Yeah, and you wanted
I,
to savor it a little bit. Go to the
yeah,
bathroom,
I sort of
splash
let
some
it
water on your face, savor it a little before you
exactly.
reply.
I let it
It
simmer
only happens once in your life. I mean,
every
not
every
that you
20
wouldn't
years.
get
It
another
only happens
agent
every
again.
20 years. Okay, so
Yeah, I mean,
I sort of
that's a
said
big deal.
I sit back on, I think I would like that very much. And then it was off to the races, But I am of the belief that when it's your time, it's your time. When you're at a spot where it's time for you to sort of make that next step, the opportunity will present itself. I'm not really woo-woo in terms of, fate and karma and whatever like that is, but I think you have to wait for that. You only need the one person. You only need one person to believe in the same thing that you believe in. And once you find it, then you're good to go. You've sort of on to the next phase. And so that's how it happened for me, a slow kind of burn. And then once it happens, it was like rocket fire. I mean, everything happened all at once. By the time that first book sold, I just kept writing, as I said. So I had 3 books already completed. So when they took that first one, I said, well, if you like that one, I've got 2 more. And so they took all 3. And that was the first series. I wrote another one in that series. That's the Cassandra Raines. And then I moved over to Detective Harriet Foster. And there are 4 books in that series so far. I've got a contract for three more. Those three are planned to be standalones. One or two of those, or maybe one, could be another Harriet. But I've got at least three more that I've got to do. So it's a good problem.
Standalones, as in it won't be part of the Cass Raines
Yeah.
or the
No,
Harriet
there's
Foster series. Yeah.
absolutely. They're planned to be standalones, and we'll figure out what those things are. Again, pantser, no plan. So I will meet those characters on the page as I meet them, and we'll see what those things, three things happen to be.
Interesting. So from the time your agent said, "Hey, I'd like to represent you," and you said, "Let's go," how much time elapsed before he said, "Hey, I got a deal"?
I think it was about a month or so because then we
Wow.
sort of had like a bidding war, which was new to me. I didn't know what the heck that was. But, he kept sort of emailing me every 2 days and saying, well, here's somebody else who's offering this. I think you can do better and blah, blah, blah. So that went on for maybe a couple, two or
Mm.
3 weeks. And then I think by the end of maybe 5 or 6 weeks, I had that first book contract. And then it was, it went on from there. But, after having nothing for 2 decades to sort of having people fight over a book that you had been spending 20 years on, it's mind-boggling. It just
Yeah.
absolutely was. I can't explain it. It's just weird. It's weird today. Um, but yeah, that's how it happened. And that's why I say when I find new writers who are sort of, depressed and sort of frustrated because they're writing their best stuff, they just haven't sort of gotten to that brass ring yet. And I just tell them, keep writing, keep doing it, keep at it because you only need that one shot. And once you get it, then you'll be there. But if you stop, you don't get there at all.
That's fast. So you got an agent in a month. A month later, you have a bidding war on
Yeah,
your hands,
well,
which sounds great.
relatively, in terms of 20 years, it was fast. So a month and a half
Yes.
or 2 months, yeah, it was fast compared to 20 years of waiting and getting rejected and getting frustrated and putting the manuscript away for 2 years, which I did, digging it out again and starting all over. So yeah, it was really fast.
So when you were
Fast.
when you started writing detective novels, um, did you find that you were trying to sound like somebody else? Did you have your own voice in the beginning, or did you feel like, I'm trying, what I'm producing is sounds too much like stuff I've read, and it took a while for you to find your own voice, or did you have your own voice right from the start?
I think I had my own voice right from the start because I've been living with it for an entire life. This character of Cass Raines, I started hearing her voice at the age of 12. So it's not like she just sort of popped on the page in 2018 when this book came out. I mean, I had been living with this sort of snarky, irreverent, tenacious private investigator for years.
Where did it come from, though? Was
I don't,
this
well, they
you?
tell you to sort of read what you like, want to write. And so I read all of those wonderful crime fiction books by female writers, Sue Grafton, Sarah Paretsky, Valerie Wilson Wesley, Paula Woods, all of those that came out in the early part of the 80s, that great wave. And so those were the things I was reading. I was also reading a lot of Agatha Christie. I read a lot of Chester Himes. So you sort of I don't know if you sort of get a feel for the genre. It's not so much the voice. I think it's the genre. PI fiction is sort of distinctive. You've got that first person uh, worldview of this sort of everyman, this sort of little guy sort of meeting up against the Goliath, a big business crime, whatever. So you've got that sort of foundation there of the genre. And then the character you create is sort of built upon that. So this voice of Cass Raines, I started hearing her at 12, 13, 14, 15. I'm writing my little stories in notebooks and sort of putting them under my mattresses, trying to figure out how to create the other part of it. And so that voice sort of popped up. That's the voice I wrote about. It wasn't so much my voice because I don't think I had one at that point. I mean, young writers don't usually have a fully formed voice yet because you're still sort of trying to teach yourself what this thing is, what this thing
Mhm.
of fiction is. And I think that takes a lot of sort of, I wouldn't say, well, thought and maybe preparation and also reading again, but you have to come upon that. You don't just sort of start with that, I don't think.
Hmm. Hmm. So, all of us have characteristics. Is there a particular characteristic or two that you possess that was really indispensable to your success? What characteristic was the one or two characteristics that made you successful at what you do?
I would say stubbornness, just my refusal to give up. I mean, all these rejection letters were saying, yeah, no, we're not interested. It's not good enough. We don't want it, blah, blah, blah. But I kind of knew that this was going to be my thing. Like, this is what I wanted to be my thing. And I knew I was good at it. That didn't mean that I didn't have work to do or things to work on and things to learn because I always knew that that was the case. Every rejection letter I got was just another postponement in terms of how I thought about it. I knew that I had something. I knew this character was valid. I knew the stories that I was telling were valid. I just had to sort of teach myself how to do it well enough so that when I send it off, maybe the next time, that would be my time. And so I think stubbornness, stick-to-itiveness, a refusal to give in, a refusal to give up, and sort of this belief that they were wrong. They just didn't see what I saw. And I think that's what got me through all those 20 years. I should have, in all actuality, I should have given up halfway through. I mean, yeah, I'm writing, pulling my hair out, trying to write these stories. I should have given up. And in fact, I did for 2 years. I put that manuscript in a drawer and there it stayed for 2 years. I didn't touch a thing on it. But the stories didn't go away. The characters didn't go away. And the sort of drive to want to write didn't go away. And so when I picked that manuscript out of the drawer again after 2 years, then the ferocity came back. It never went anywhere, but it sort of multiplied. I was bound and determined that I was not going to give up until I got what I wanted.
Now,
And I
have you had bouts of writer's block along the way, or was that never an issue for you?
I wouldn't call it writer's block. It's just a sort of, me again, writing myself into a corner and trying to figure out how to get out of it. It wasn't block. It was just I haven't figured out the exit.
Hmm.
And so I pace a lot and I think a lot. And when I write myself into a corner, I sort of think about where I am and what wrong turn I might have taken and what I sort of might need to sort of get myself onto the next phase. But it's never not doing anything. I'm never not writing. Either I'm writing on the page or I'm writing in my head or I'm thinking about writing either place. But I'm always thinking about story and how to make it the best I can and raise the stakes and get those characters where they need to be and try to figure out how to confound them at every turn. And then also to think about the experience of the reader. And you want your reader to have a good time when they read your stuff. You want them to enjoy what they're doing. And so all of those things are going into my thought process. And I've got to figure out how to get myself out the corner. And if it takes a day or 2 days, or it might even take a week, doesn't mean that I'm not writing. I'm thinking about it. I'm sort of putting myself in the desk in front of that laptop. I might be writing stuff that I might not ultimately use, but I'm always writing. And so, no, not writer's block, just writer's stall.
Well, you said two things that I wanted to point to. One being pacing,
Mhm.
physically pacing. I think that's one of the great writers' tools that a lot of writers don't even think about or realize. But to actually physically move stimulates the brain. There's something about pacing. Pacing is a rhythm, and
Yeah.
writing is rhythm. Like almost everything in life, you have to establish a rhythm to it, or it's not going to, there's not going to be any continuity there. There's not going to be any real vibe there. So interesting because I do a fair amount of pacing myself for that very reason. But you also mentioned that you keep writing and you say I may or may not use it.
Mhm.
So you produce a lot of copy that you're willing to throw out if it just doesn't make the grade. You're not one of those writers who says, well, if I by the time I've written it, I know I'm going to use it and I use it and I really don't leave anything on the cutting room floor.
Mhm. No, I don't have no problem deleting stuff. I'm an editor by profession. And so as a writer, I'm sort of editing and writing. So when I write something and I know instinctively that that's not going to go. I have no problem cutting it. Because it makes the story better, it makes the character's journey better. You're always looking for whatever's going to make your story better. And so if that little scene or that chapter doesn't fit or doesn't sort of gel or it sort of lags your story halfway through, it has to go. And you can't be too precious about it. You might have written the most perfect sentence in that chapter that you have ever written in your entire life, but if it doesn't fit for that story or that character or it moves your story along, it's got to go. Now you can sort of save it in a drawer somewhere or in a file somewhere and look at it on occasion to see how brilliant you were, but for that story, it's not going to go and it has to go. It has to go.
Yeah, and
That's
it's possible it could get used at a future time,
Yeah, if
but
you just one
yeah.
up, I mean, but for that one, for that story you're telling, it doesn't fit. It has to go. You can't be too precious about it. It will tell you, kill your darlings, kill them, kill them. Somebody's got to kill them.
Well,
It better
it
be.
makes it easier to kill them if what you're doing is you're okay. I'm having a hard time I want to keep it, but I
Mhm,
realize it doesn't really work in this context. So, like you say, if you put it in a notebook or put it in a scraps file,
mhm.
it's easier to part with it because you know it's still there.
Yeah,
It's still
yeah,
there someday if you want it. If you want to look back at it, and as you say, see how brilliant I was at the
exactly.
time.
Your job as a writer here, right? You're writing this book. You have to serve the story, not yourself. It's about the story, it's about the plot, it's about how it moves, it's about how your characters interact, it's how you tell your story. And if it does not sort of contribute to that and sort of lags it down, it has to go.
Along those lines, I mean, it's kind of analogous. My wife told me about a woman she knows who she doesn't like to give up things in her home, but
Hmm.
and so she started to accumulate stuff. But she figured out that if I just take a photograph of it, so that I can always look back at it, she's able to get rid of it because she's got the photograph, and so she's got the memory of it and the image of it, and not completely analogous to what we're saying, but it's that same sort of thing where as long as I save this scrap of copy that isn't really suitable for what I'm working on now, easier to part with it if I know it's set aside and
Yeah.
I can always go back to it if there's a real reason to do that. How long does it take you, Tracy, to complete a novel? If you were to average them out, maybe not counting your very first ones, which may have taken a lot of time and sat in a drawer for years.
Mhm.
Um, now that you're in a real rhythm, and you're under contract and you have deadlines, how long does each novel usually take?
Well, I get 10 months for each book under this current contract. So
Is
I
that
take
sufficient?
for me, no. But 10 months is what I got. So that's what I have to work with.
What would be ideal?
Well, first contract I had gave me an entire year. I got 12 months. So the second contract I got with the new publisher gave me 10 months, which is a little constricting, but you do what you got to do.
Hmm.
Because this is a business. It's not just craft. It's not just the writer's sort of vision. It's a business, and they need the book in 10 months. And so that's when you give it to them. And so I take 10 full months. They get on whatever that deadline date is by 4:30 that evening or whatever that date is. That's when they get it. End of business day on that deadline day, just like they need it. And you sort of stick to that because that's the gig. That's the business. That's the business part of it. Because other stuff has to happen once you've delivered it, right? I mean, they have to edit it and they have to sort of create their marketing campaign and their promo and all their publicity and all that stuff is based on what you deliver to them. And they need it when they need it. And that's when you should give it to them. And then you move on to the next thing.
Hmm. Um, how has your writing changed with age?
Um, I think it's gotten better, deeper. I think I've got a better respect for the craft elements than I did before because when I first started out, I sort of had to teach myself what those things were. I didn't know what pacing was that first book. And I think that was probably the main problem of why it took so long to get published. There were things I still needed to learn. I think I've learned those basic craft elements now. And now it's a situation of wanting to sort of get better at it. I don't think you ever get to a point where you know everything and are, completely professional about it and there's nothing you don't know. I think we're always sort of learning how to make things better, deeper, more engaging for readers, more engaging for you as you're writing it. So I think it's gotten a little better, a little deeper, a little stronger. And I'm looking forward to it getting even stronger still as I go along. So there are still things I don't know, still things that I'm sort of working with. And yeah, that's a wonderful thing about writing. You never get to the end. There's never a situation where you've learned it all and you don't have to know anything else.
Yeah.
It's always
Always
something,
learning, always
absolutely,
learning. There's
always
always
something,
something to write, and
absolutely.
and you can do it your whole life. I mean, you can be
Yeah,
90 years old as
yeah.
long as you're mentally replete. You can be 90 or 100 and be
Yeah.
writing.
And as you go, your life experience sort of spills over, so you know a little bit more about living and being a human being, and those things sort of come onto your pages. A 20 some year old writer probably doesn't know as much as maybe a 50-year-old writer, and it could probably show somewhere in that manuscript. So as you grow as a person, your work grows as a writer, gets deeper and stronger and more poignant. I mean, poignant. And so, yeah, you're always learning, you're always getting better, you're always getting to the next thing.
So true or false, there's never been a better time to be a black female writer of fiction.
Um, Better time. I think it's been a better time than it was before. I mentioned that first wave of female crime writers in the early 80s. It took another decade for us to get writers of color. Walter Mosley, Valerie Wilson Wesley, Eleanor Taylor Black. It took another decade for those people to sort of exert themselves, and then, they were there. Some of them were gone pretty quickly. Others sort of stayed a little bit longer, but it was sort of, I don't know. There was this misconception that, Black writers didn't have a readership, that there was nobody out there that was going to read their stories. I even had one of the publishers who sort of rejected me say, well, we hired a black writer just last week. We don't need another one. Readers, our black readers don't read. Who's going to be the audience for this? I think that has gotten
That's
better.
news to Terry McMillan and
Yeah,
Zadie Smith and
yeah, yeah. So we had those isolated things. I think we're getting a little better today. We've got a lot more writers of color, not just African
Mhm.
Americans, but
Not to mention
writers
Toni
of color.
Morrison. I mean, she dates
Absolutely.
way back, but it does seem that today the publishing business is looking more for more female writers, more writers of color, more
Yep.
queer writers, you
Yep.
name it.
Yep. Yep.
There's a lot more diversity
Yeah.
that they're looking for, and obviously that the thought that Black Americans aren't really into reading has been exploded. And
Yeah.
then Terry McMillan stuff was turned into
Absolutely.
yeah, movies and Toni Morrison. So so let me ask you this: if you were organizing a dinner party and you were going to invite three literary figures as guests at your home for dinner, dead or alive, who would your three be?
Hmm. Agatha Christie, definitely. Um, Maya Angelou,
Mm.
definitely. And probably Sue Grafton, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That'd be quite a conversation.
Yeah, wouldn't it? I can just imagine. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, do you spend time watching? I always like to ask about, what are you streaming on Netflix or other, streaming channels?
Mhm.
Do you spend time watching any crime movies and shows? Do they help inform your writing or inspire you?
I don't have a lot of time for streaming, but when I do, I sort of do the opposite of what I write. So I write sort of gritty, Chicago-based, crime novels. And so I will, when I'm done or my brain is sort of maxed out, I will put on Father Brown from PBS or Midsummer Murders or something like that. Something where somebody's murdered in a village by, falling into a vat of berries or something. Something that's totally opposite of what I'm writing. Just to sort of relax and sort of cleanse the palate, so to speak. I kind of like those things that sort of have an interesting puzzle, comfortable characters, and then, something different from what I'm writing.
Now, if you're writing was a musical genre, would it be jazz? Would it be bebop? Would it be blues? Would it be rap? If you were to, I realize that that's a little bit of an offbeat question, but I'm curious whether you're writing, if you were to say musical genre, this is
Hmm.
what it is.
Probably maybe a combination of blues and jazz, not so sunny, not so positive, but meaningful, meaningful.
Hmm. Hmm. Final question. Do you listen to, when you're writing, do you listen to anything? Do you listen to music? Do you have maybe, a TV a news program running in the background, or do you like just the silence?
I write in silence. The only sound I hear are the voices in my head. I don't listen to music. I don't watch television while I'm writing out of the corner of my eye. I am in a room. I'm in it right now. There's nothing on but my voice. No radio, no nothing. Just silence. The voices in my head, and then we're ready to go.
Now, Edge is going to be your next one. It's out in December.
Mhm.
And just in terms of your next book after that, do you already have something in the works?
Yep, I'm thinking about it right now. It's titled You'll Never Find Me. It's my first
Oh.
standalone. I'm still looking at characters, looking for voices. I have partial ideas of what those voices might be, but it hasn't quite gelled yet. I kind of have an idea of where the story is going and where it might end, but I haven't gotten any solid footing on beginning, middle, or end yet. The ideas are
Gotcha.
there, they're percolating. Scenes sort of pop into my head as I'm doing something else. I have a pretty good idea of how I want it to start and where it needs to go. And now it's a question of putting it down, making it solid, and then going back and revising it and making it art.
Hmm. Hmm. And to our listeners, in the episode notes, you will find the URL to Tracy's website where you can see all of her novels and learn more about her. Tracy, thanks a million for coming on the program. I really do appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me.